non-Christians from Bake Up, so some of them are in the background. So we had this crazy thing of like things didn't feel like they were going anywhere until some of our friends from where we used to live started coming every Sunday, and things kind of grew momentum-wise from there, which was amazing. I suppose the first thing that occurs to me, like obviously with Antioch, we've got estates and diverse sides, and there's bits about every church that might fit into different categories, but I think a bit of a difference between estates and diverse. Generally speaking, estates, like when we're thinking about a venue, we're thinking about quite a specific community, a specific geography. So we're on Brooklands estate, and we're like, we need a venue on Brooklands estate, or very close to it, because that's where we're planning a church. Whereas like for you, Daniel, in the city centre, it's like the city centre, you know, and like John in the notes writes about the plant that was in Cheetham Hill, and that they moved around a lot because it was just like that was a kind of general area that they were just trying to find somewhere in that kind of neck of the woods. So particular geography, when we're looking for a venue, matters a bit more with estates, I think. But interestingly, Antioch started off, and we've just revised the kind of official way that we do things, because in the initial kind of paperwork about what Antioch would be, it specifies that we're not going to be planting in church buildings. And the thinking behind that is, you know, we want to be in accessible spaces, like third spaces, places that people who are not used to church are going to be comfortable in, and all that kind of stuff. And all that thinking still remains the case, but the journey over the last few years has been realising the reality that sometimes that's a sort of nice theory, but practically speaking, it's not always possible. And that was the case for us. So we started off in our kitchen, but obviously had a vision to be some kind of public space eventually. And where did I go? Pubs. You guys had planted in a pub in Bolton. We were like, well, that seems pretty fun. Let's do that. The local pub to us is called the Jolly Butcher. The landlord is not in any way jolly. Yeah, he gave me very short shrift when I went in to talk about planting a church in his way. So I tried their local football club, similar. I tried to play the long game with our school. So missionally speaking, we positioned ourselves like we lived just opposite the school, because we were like, right, our boys are going to go there, it's the school for the estate, this is going to be the way, our kind of main way, at least to begin with, into connecting with people and mission on the estate. And also, like, if we kind of serve them and stuff, they'll let us have church in school. So as soon as I could, I became a parent governor, and you know, tried to play the long game and earn their trust and stuff. And then when it came to the moment of like, hey, could we have church in here? They were like, no. Like, oh, all right, great. So this is a one-way thing, is it? What else? There's a youth centre that was just I mean, because we're Wythenshawe, like all the estates are kind of right next to each other, so they sort of kind of merge into one another, but sort of a separate entities as well. So there was a youth centre just tipping over into the next estate that we looked at. They didn't want anything religious. So we were struggling, and all the way through had been good friends with the pastor at this church, which is Brooklands Church of Nazarene, which is right in the centre of the estate. and actually is the only like public building on our estate. There's no community centre because that would have been a logical space to go. There's no like, yeah, there's nothing. So this is like, you know, people are in there, brownies and tutoring and different groups. If someone wants a birthday party, they hire that kind of thing. So it sort of functions like a community centre / church, and we've been have become good friends with the pastor there, and he kept on saying, "Hey, I mean, you can always have our place," because he knew we met in the afternoon, we met in the morning, so it would be fine. And so that's eventually what we ended up doing. And me, all the while, I mean, Tom could tell you from his perspective, because these guys were on board by the time we made that move. But it always in the back of my mind was thinking, oh, this isn't really ideal. Do you know what I mean? Partly in my head, I had the experience I had in Bacup when it was part of parish churches, but a parish church that didn't have its own building and used the Methodist hall, but at the same time that the Methodists were in their chapel right next door. So you had two churches in the same building meeting at the same time. And my experience in terms of evangelism and mission was it made it incredibly complex and hard to communicate who we were to people. Like, people didn't really know what you were inviting them into. Like, you might have a nice conversation about Jesus, but it was like, come to church. What church are you? Well, we're Christ Church, but we meet in the Method. And you could just see them going, this all seems a bit much, really. And why are churches doing different things in the same place and stuff? So partly I've probably been a bit burnt by that. And also just thinking, like, I don't want the fact that we're in a church to put anyone off. We want this to be something that people are going to want to come to, and it doesn't look quite as, you know, welcoming as the Jolly Butcher, at least until you get in the Jolly Butcher. But actually, speaking personally, I've really grown to love it. It's been there in the community a long time, so there's a sense, and it doesn't look that churchy, apart from the massive cross. So there's a sense that it's like quite a trusted sort of part of the community. People will have history with it as well often, which is interesting to kind of work with. You know, they might have, you know, 40 years ago gone to Sunday school there or something like that. Something I thought worth mentioning is, like, why are we talking about having a venue, and why don't we just do house church? Like, we started in a house. Like, house churches exist around the world. There seems to be life there often. Well, as Antioch, we're not doing house church, partly out of a conviction of wanting to reach people who aren't, like we've said, reach people who aren't going to be reached in any other way. And certainly that would tally with our experience of meeting in the house. It was great in getting things going, and many people grew in their faith and came to faith through that time. But the significant limitation of it was that it's only really people who knew us really well who would come, like, or who we'd been out. And you don't want to be limited by those who you can, like, invest significantly in are the only people that are able to come to church. And because certainly where we are, it's a bit weird to invite someone to church in your house, isn't it? Like, you know, like, not everyone's going to go for that. Some people will, but not everyone. It requires quite a high level of relationship and trust to, like, walk into some nutter's house and be like, hey, I'm here for church. Whereas being here, like, you then open yourself up to, sometimes people just walk through the door and be like, hey, saw it's open, what's going on, kind of thing. People might see an advert on social media. People can invite their friends. It's just, even though people don't really necessarily know what church is always, they at least can kind of, there's something kind of tangible. They're like, okay, it's at this building, my friend goes, or I can. So that's why a venue, I think. Also advertising. So while we were meeting on a Sunday in our house, it's like we want to invite people, but what do you want to put stuff out on the internet, like with your address on and stuff like that? Maybe that's not the wisest thing. Like, it's okay if you know someone and you, it's like, come to our house, we live here, but you probably don't want to just chuck that up on Facebook or whatever, because that just doesn't seem that sensible. Yeah, so this building itself for us has been, we started off, we were like, okay, they've got this like back hall, we'll just be in there. So this bit here is, they call it the sanctuary, they're like the worship area. But here is this hall. So we moved in and there was like 20 of us or whatever, so we were like, well, that's plenty, and we were trying to retain kind of some of the homely aspect of where we'd been, so we'll just meet there. We could get kind of slightly comfier chairs in and be sort of informal in the way we were sat round. But that actually only was us for 5-6 months, because it quickly wasn't big enough. Which is a good problem to have.
And sometimes as well, it was like you wanted to go into like deeper conversation. You were very aware you had like small ears running around.
Yeah,
and it was like, actually, how do we separate kids from adults as well?
Sure.
So actually go deeper as well.
Yeah. So then we sort of had the opposite problem of being it. So this space, it can seat 140 or something like that. So, and they have all their like rows of chairs out. I haven't got a picture of the inside, but so it feels a few steps up in the like churchiness, and it's quite a long way away from like just hanging out in a house, and so then it's like, okay, how do we? So again, just speaking personally, like for a while, I felt kind of uneasy about that transition, and we try hard to kind of make things as like accessible for people, like with moving the chairs around and stuff. But then that just got really tiring, and eventually we're just like, can't be bothered doing all this chair work every Sunday because it's just going to kill us. So yeah, now we just kind of trust that things have moved on in terms of where the church is at, that people are okay with it being in that space, and they're coming for Jesus, they're coming for community, rather than because it's, you know, they get to sit on a nice sofa or whatever in a house. So some principles, I think some of this is in the notes, some just two things really. Praying, because like God's always got a plan even if we can't see it. Like, you know, I had all sorts of, I remember church plant we were in Stockport 10 or 12 years ago, and that had went on a similar journey in terms of Sunday venue, from like conservatory to school to community centre. But one of the plans there at one time was let's start a school. Like the local high school was shutting down. It was like, but there was some premises. There was an opening for someone to start school, and so the idea at one time was like, let's start a school, and the church can like sort of like flow out of that. And looking back, it was crazy. But I just say that and share that to say, like, we can have all sorts of ideas that at the time seem like really, well, this is definitely what God wants, what this community needs. But it's only God who knows those things really, and He's got quite a good habit and track record of leading us to the right thing eventually. So that's an encouraging thought, isn't it? But we're only likely to be able to benefit from the Lord and His guiding if we're praying, if we're really willing to trust in Him. The other thing I'd say is like to get some perspective, because I think we probably all realise that more important than the venue is what people experience when they get there. So like we can get stressed out about like the right venue, and there are things, don't get me wrong. So I went and preached at New Life Salford in January when they were in the middle of like the most horrific issues with their venue. Basically, they were in this sort of ex-church building that didn't have any heating. And so I was there, it was like January 15th or something, and it was like 1 degree outside and about 6 degrees inside. And it was like, this is just, like, you just can't do this.
Yeah.
You might be able to, like, yeah. So there's things like that that are just like, you need some basic stuff like heating, and you need enough space and reliability and all that kind of stuff. But in the end, like the venue isn't the main thing, is it? It's 12 o'clock. There we go. Saying the Lord's Prayer. Yeah, the venue's not the main thing. It's what people come when they, what kind of welcome do they experience in that venue, and those things can transport around any venue, can't they? What do they experience in worship? Who's the God that they meet when they come to worship? That's the real stuff. But venues it's like part of the big picture of planting a church, and it is something that we need to attend to and take notice of. Our experience has not, like, we just didn't think this is what it would be, but God's used it. So I think like He can do that, I know Tom's thinking at the moment about like the future and what kind of venues there might be, and it's hard when there's not like an obvious one, because it's like, oh, well, what we're going to do. But, and I know you guys have thought like, is the pub going to always be the thing?
And it's interesting how God has, over the last year or so, as we've been looking at other venues, and you've prayed, and then God has sort of closed the door. Anyway, won't go into detail, and it's trusting Him to do that, isn't it? Like Ben had organised that we were going to trial meeting in the local high school. And then he found out that another church was actually meeting in there, but none of us knew about it. That says a lot about it anyway. And we just felt, no, it just wouldn't be right to again, it's your thing about who's, like when you were meeting in that church with the Methodists. What are you inviting people to? And there's this other group that they all sort of travel in to Breaknet and then travel out again by all
that's
the
interesting.
camps.
So there are significant moments with the venue question where like your vision kind of intersects with like, where are we meeting, and it's been switched on to those, isn't it? It's like it's not just any venue, because that's not going to work, like, because maybe for a state church, like, it's not in the place that we're trying to reach. Like, so if you're compromising on your vision for a venue, then you've got problems.
In City Life, we have a very wonderful venue. But one thing I observed was there is a church that meets upstairs. And also has a similar name.
Right.
I think City Church or something like that.
Okay.
So there have been some occasions, someone will come around, be sitting there, then recognize I'm in the wrong place.
Meeting at the same time.
Well, they have some meetings. That's
Okay.